Today on the Nameless Book Club, we'll be discussing The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. Okay, so this is the first time we're going to be trying this. We have read up to about page 219 on the Kindle version that we have, part 1 of The Poppy War. And we're going to discuss the book generally and talk about a few passages that we liked and a few general ideas. But mostly this is going to be a free-form sort of discussion forum where we're going to try and read. What did we end up saying? About 200 pages a week?
Yeah, somewhere in that neighborhood. I think we were talking about 225, 200.
Something
today.
like that.
My Kindle version said 216, so...
Okay, so somewhere right in that range, and that will allow us to sort of move through material at a fair clip so that we're getting in hopefully 2 books a month, but on a longer book that's 500 or 600 pages, we might only get through a book and a half. So we're starting with a fantasy novel, but generally we're going to try and have representative, a few categories on the show. So obviously fantasy and then science fiction, and then we'll also do some classics and also a few academic works here and there if we think they're particularly relevant. We've gone over our credentials quite a few times at this point on the channel, but I guess it bears mentioning, at least at the outset here, that I do have some training in literary analysis and a very small amount of specific knowledge on the fantasy genre. And Michael here has also studied literature to a lesser extent, but is equally well-read, etc., etc. And so the reason we started this show is we're effectively just continuing something we've done for most of our adult lives, and just taping it, which is we often pick books and move through them together, and at set intervals we would get together and talk about it. The only difference is now we're reading a little bit more each week and formalizing it and recording these videos. So before we just jump right into the topic, I guess the last thing I'll say is we're not really going to be reviewing these books unless you feel like you want it to be more review-ish down the road. I guess at the outset here I was thinking maybe we would, just for fun, sort of try and rate each session on the scale of 1 to 9 Amberites. And then maybe when we're done with the book, the last meeting, maybe we'll give it like an overall rating as well, and give it a yay or nay, like whether we would recommend it.
I think we might also occasionally reference a scale you and I have used in the past, separate from our overall rating of the Amberites. But you and I have talked about what we call the EE scale, or the enrichment and enjoyment scale.
I didn't know we were using that for the show.
Well, I think it may come up occasionally, because I don't know if that applies for the same type of a...
No, I like that. I mean, we've used it for years now. We may as well include it in this format.
Because, like, for me, if I say, oh, yeah, this is an 8 out of 9 Amberites, you should go buy it. I mean, like, overall, all things considered, it's a great book, go get it. Whereas that sort of EE scale we talk about, it's for us, we've always used it to compare the enjoyment to how much benefit it provides as a being, as how much enrichment you get out of it, how much it feeds the mind, and not just how much you enjoy it. So it may come up. I figure it's worth noting anyway.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the general form, is we're going to pick a book, we're going to try and move through about 200 to 250 pages a week, and we're going to get together, and we hope, we're hoping that people will start to give us suggestions on books or share their opinions, so on and so forth. And we're hoping as time goes on that we'll just move through material at a pretty good clip and have some fun once a week, getting together and doing what we love, which is, literary analysis and armchair intellectualism. So, the Poppy War. We've uncharacteristic for us. What is going on back there?
The dog is pestering both of us.
Oh, the dog is back there.
Yeah, she really wants to. She chose this moment to play, and so
of course
she's been sitting right next to me and whining, And then if not that, she's been bringing us toys and dropping them on us and such. So
Excellent. I don't think the
assume
mic
he's trying
is
to.
picking up the whining.
Okay,
So
perfect.
I was just noticing that like every so often one of the two of you is flailing. It's totally fine. And you know, also as a disclaimer up front, this is going to be real freeform. I'm not going to edit this thing into oblivion. If we stutter around a little bit, it's fine. This is the type of show I'm hoping if people watch it that it's totally a throw it on in the background while you play video games as
Yeah.
as you read you read the book on your own time and then throw us on while you're playing Call of Duty or fucking whatever game you play.
And maybe add your interpretation to the comments later.
Yeah, exactly. That's the type of thing that I'm interested in here. If you want a more sort of formalized version of content, then check out our news shows or our writing show that's upcoming. But let's jump right in. I was saying uncharacteristic for us is that we've been reading the book for a little bit over a week and we really haven't talked about it almost at all. Which normally we're pretty bad about breaking the rules and just calling and sort of unleashing the good bits of our conversation before we've even finished the book or the section. So my first question is, should we give our ratings maybe at the beginning here, and then discuss and then re-rate them at the end of the episode and see if either of us has changed or.
Yeah.
That could be kind of fun.
That could be interesting. Yeah.
So first week I'll go first, and then next week you have to go first with rating, just so that we can equalize the groupthink element of it. I would give the first section a straight 4.5 out of 9 Amberites. Like straight down the middle. It's the lowest score I could give it without having to justify the score. I would say it's not a bad mark or a good mark. I think it's just
You're right in the middle.
It's okay.
Yeah. Interesting. I think I was probably going to go about a 6, honestly.
So
and assuming this is without justification, without further explanation, like overall first part about a 6 out of 9 Amberites.
Okay. So you think that it was pretty good?
Yeah.
I would say if you gave it an 8 or above, you would have to give a pretty solid explanation for I thought this was really good. But 6, it's better than just being a middle of the road. Okay.
It's a safe way of saying, I like it. You know, I'm not blown away. I'm not amazed. But I liked it. You know.
All right. So let's, I guess, just dive into a discussion of the text proper then. And we'll see at the end, maybe you can convince me to give it that extra 1.5 Amberites. 1.5 or whatever. So
again, we're not mathematicians. So.
No, we're not. So I guess I'll start with my general interpretation, and then hopefully we'll just ping pong. I think this is maybe the most derivative fantasy story that I have read in. I don't want to be hyperbolic and say ever, but in terms of it, we got this off of the best fantasy of 2019. Excuse me as I spit. The 2019 or 2018 list off of the New York Times, I think. So
I thought it was Goodreads, but maybe it was.
Or Goodreads, so it did well in terms of sales and recognition and all of those things, as well as appearing on these lists of the best novels of the given year. And yet it was very Harry Potter to me. I thought the parallels there were incredibly strong, down to almost to the individual character. It was very archetypical school system based fantasy story where you have the special child who miraculously goes to the special school, and most of the story is them trying to fit into a higher brow or unconventional world in comparison to what they know. I can name, just off the top of my head, there's The Magicians, there's Harry Potter, there's The Name of the Wind is this way. Many of I mean, Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea has elements of this.
And I think if you were to look at it more broadly, just in the sense of an outsider trying to fit into a pre-established system, I think probably one of the Narnia novels might even be kind of similar. There might be some parallels there where,
Yes.
you know, it's not a totally unheard of trope or
Absolutely.
design.
Absolutely. So the reason I'm bringing that up is I don't think that being derivative is bad. So that's one thing. If you're watching our show, at least when I'm talking about a work being derivative, I mean that pretty much neutrally, because I really liked The Lord of the Rings, and I enjoy reading other people's take on The Lord of the Rings, even though it's derivative and I can expect some story elements to be the same. It's often the individual elements of the author that come through with their use of a given form, a given story archetype, that pleases me at the aesthetic level as a reader. And that's why academically I was willing to focus on fantasy even all the way up through my graduate work, because I believe pretty strongly that fantasy is a great vehicle for philosophical explication and the creation of worlds that make people feel ideas in a powerful way. And so in this case, I'm perfectly happy with the derivative nature of the main plot, because it's a tried and tested form, and it doesn't. I'm not disappointed in this case at all. I'll let you jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to point out the derivative nature, because other things that are derivative often are, parodies, for example. It's a completely obvious, overt derivation of an original work
Right.
that you're then turning into a comedy. There's a whole market for this type of thing, so I don't think it's bad. I loved Harry Potter. I thought they were fun books, maybe not the best in the world. They kind of have some importance that you pointed out to me, as far as getting kids to read and things of that nature. So I liked it. I didn't mind that part at all. In fact, when people have asked me, like, oh, hey, what are you reading? I would say things like, well, it's Harry Potter meets insert other book or story. And because it also kind of serves as an easy way to describe the book. So I also noticed that. I also pointed it out. But I think there were some ways where it departed that were really interesting. One of the things that drew me into this book, because we had narrowed it down to, what, 3 or 4?
Yeah, 3 or 4.
Yeah, we were deciding what to read. The thing that drew me to this one is that it mentioned how it was a fantasy from an Eastern background, essentially. Most fantasy I've read is like medieval European in style, I guess. You know, horses and swords and knights and armor and things of that nature. So I was really curious to see how a fantasy with Eastern background would turn out and what it would feel like. And I was pleased that it's not overly heavy-handed. It's not constantly all the time trying to remind you, like, oh yeah, we're in Asia. Oh yeah, like this is Chinese or this is Asiatic. So that part of it I was impressed by, because I think someone who wasn't aware of the culture, or someone who wasn't part of the culture or what have you, they would be a little more explicit and maybe a little more clumsy about it. Whereas here it was done very well. So I enjoyed it. As I said, I had a 6 rating. Overall, it's just kind of a vague summary I think we're doing here, and I definitely think I'm excited to see what comes next. Is the where I'm landing on that.
Well, the first thing I'll say to that is, of course, all of Le Guin's fantasy is heavily Eastern influenced. So you've had some exposure to what fantasy looks like
Eastern
through that
isn't the
lens.
right word, because like I don't want to come off sounding racist, but like I don't know where she's drawing the influence specifically, but I know it's Chinese, Japanese.
I thought it's 5th century China.
China. Okay.
Yeah, she evidently, the author is like 21, number
Yeah.
1, and they came over here to the United States when she was 4, and so for me, aesthetically, it's very digestible fantasy, because and I don't know if this is positive or not, because I feel like the elements of the Chinese culture here are pretty cliche, and so I would like to see some more research into, because I mean what we're dealing with here is the classic monks with super punches. It's Dragon Ball Z. It's I wonder to what degree the reuse of that particular cultural element is productive, but for the purposes of this analysis, let's just assume that it's more or less, somewhere in the middle. Like it's not overtly negative or positive. It's just this is the aesthetic choice that she made.
And maybe that also belies my base understanding of Chinese culture, is that I don't know where to fall on that stance as far as is it cliche or not, or because I'm a dumb American ultimately.
Well, I mean, think how different is what she's talking about from like Mortal Kombat, like Liu Kang.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, aside from like the Harry Potter influence, as it were, like the fighting parts, the martial arts,
But I mean, isn't that effectively the story of the first Mortal Kombat movie? Is he meets the eccentric god guy, and does a fighting tournament and goes crazy, gets overheated in the end, and throws a fireball. Like that's basically. I'm simplifying here, and I don't want that to imply that I didn't think this was a good book or that I don't think it is a good book. What I'm saying is there's a very distinct American style to the writing, and I think it meshes very well with her obvious desire to represent the culture of her homeland in the text. And so whether or not we agree or disagree with the specific cultural elements that she chose to highlight here, I think that as she develops as a writer in future novels, I'm wondering if her choices are going to become much more sophisticated. And so there might be a lot to look forward to. I think this is a series. I'm not entirely sure, but it sounds like you're trying to get something out.
No, I was just thinking. I mean, maybe that's a more eloquent way of putting how I said it. It's not heavy-handed. Certainly, there aren't any overly complex cultural elements present. Things that might require more explanation or might require more understanding.
Right.
And I kind of desire that, because reading this, I do want to know more about the culture it's based on, even if it's not directly applicable to the fantasy. I am sort of interested in trying to piece out, is this a part of the Chinese culture that she's sort of trying to include, or is it something of her own imagination? And I just don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're probably doing this in the wrong order.
Yeah.
Because we're thinking of it just as a conversation. Should we summarize the text?
I mean, it certainly couldn't hurt, because, like, by the way, if you haven't caught on yet, like, spoiler alert.
Yeah, maybe we should have done that at the beginning, but hey, we're experimenting. We're fucking doing it live. Let's go. So the book is so far at least, it's the story of a very poor, what would you call her? A stepdaughter. It's the classic mistreated stepdaughter or adopted daughter story. Very Cinderella. Where in this case, the girl wants to take a crazy test, so she convinces a teacher to take her on for free, etc. And through trial and tribulation, she is able to miraculously cram years and years of study into just 2 years, and then trounces all of these other kids who've been training for most of their lives and destroys a test that allows her to go to the most prestigious university in her country and in their empire. She does so, and it's very much like I said, a Harry Potter situation where there are masters that, your McGonagalls, your Professor Snapes, all of those are there with their requisite distinct archetypical personalities. The martial arts guy is a vindictive douchebag. The lore master is a mystical weirdo, etc. And again, through trial and tribulation, she ends up learning a great deal and then apprenticing with the lore master, who is foreshadowed so far to be one of few remaining, if not the only remaining, super monk, I guess is how it appears. Like, it looks like they can do, like, super chi force punches and
Yeah.
some other...
Make the leaves rustle.
Yeah, there's some inklings of just overt sorcery. And then there were I believe, two instances of actual just chi force magic punching stuff.
Yeah.
And they're calling it shaman, being a shaman.
Yeah.
Which is a little strange. That seemed like an odd melding
and
of
she
terms.
also is using the term ki, like ki, to describe.
That's chi.
Oh, that's how it's pronounced? Okay.
Yeah, that's...
Well, my bad.
You've heard it in movies and whatever your whole life. You just didn't know the pronunciation.
I'd never seen it written, because I've also seen in a couple of games they'll use that, and I assumed ki was a thing that was separate from what I thought was chi.
As far as I know, those are the same concept.
Excellent.
We can double check that. Maybe I'm making us both look fools, but I'm almost certain that ki is chi. So,
yep.
Anyway.
Well, and as I said, I mean, I'm wearing my ignorance on my sleeve, as it were. Like, I know.
Yeah. I mean, we just are reading the book and trying to engage with it. No one is purporting to be an expert on the terminology or whatever. And it's... Anyway, we'll gloss that and move on. So I want to make a more direct criticism of the text. Now that we've sort of gone over the basic... I'm not going to go scene by scene. We're assuming at this point that you've read the text up with us. Or if you haven't, that, like, maybe now is the time to, like, pause the video and then get the book and read it. Unless you just want us to ruin the whole thing. So I thought that there was about an equal parts of where it was fun to read and where it was what I considered to be just kind of really childish, inappropriate, like, not fun. I don't know, because I don't just want to say that it was bad. I wish I could convey a more objective sense of, like, there are some things that happen that just don't land correctly for me. Like the fart jokes. It just doesn't... Who is this for? And I don't know. For me, that element of the text really took away from my ability to engage with the world, and I felt like the grit was really inconsistent. It's nothing, and then sudden menstruation, and then she's drinking a potion to destroy her internal organs, and then no mention of it, and that's fine. I don't have an issue with the menstruation being in there. I don't have an issue with the discussion of sterilization, but what surrounds it, the fart jokes, and then sort of like the campy Harry Potter school feel, and then also the weird element of, like, but it's super serious and the kids fight each other and shit, like, it just... For me, it was a little bit all over the place, and that's why it doesn't move up into, like, the 6s, 7s, 8s for me. What do you say to that?
Yeah, overall, I think that I kind of felt that way too, but maybe I just really enjoyed there was one section where I just couldn't put it down, and it was before this tournament that she has where she has to fight and prove that she's worthy of staying in the university. There's this about, I don't know, 50 to 75 page chunk right before that fight where it's about her struggles to learn, and she's working with this bizarro, weird, I think his name's Jiang character, and just doing strange things. And there's this whole bit about carrying a pig up the mountain and blah, blah, blah. And all of it's sort of like a Rocky-esque, like, I can be a contender. That part I really enjoyed, and so it offset from that the other parts where, yeah, it wasn't executed well. It didn't fall perfect. Until I had read more of the context around it, the bit where, like, I think it's interesting that she included the, like, you know, it's a coming of age story. Yep, it's interesting she talked about menstruation. And I think it's important because we want kids and others to see that, like, yep, this is real life, that happens to women. I'm totally okay with it there, but it did come out of sort of left field, and I'm not sure if it was executed well. So I sort of support the idea she was going for, certainly, but I don't think it was enough to detract from my enjoyment of the rest of it, where it would bring me down to that, median, like exactly in the middle rating. I really, really liked that tournament scene. Maybe I'm just a sucker for cool, fighting and those sort of like that whole chunk kind of felt like an extended montage in some sort of movie, and maybe that's exactly right up my alley, at least in this type of book. So
Yeah, the carrying the pig up the mountain. I don't know. I guess if I'm honest, I thought that was a little cheesy. And I mean, I like cheesy shit, and even I was reading that, and I was okay, you know. But a great deal of the text so far has mostly been just about this girl abusing herself for the purpose of study. And even though I guess that's interesting, I don't know ideologically if that's the strongest thing that the author could be putting forward. And I think that's a question that I would ask is, enjoyment aside, because it sounds to me like we're quibbling over. I'm saying it's a C rating for enjoyment, and you're saying no. I think it's more of a B or even an A for enjoyment. The problem for me is, even if I was to say, okay, I could bump up to a B on enjoyment, I don't see how it gets anything better than like a below C for enrichment.
yeah, I would even go so far as to say probably even a D for enrichment. I think we're both pretty spot on. C plus B enjoyment. It's kind of a fun story, but so far it's sort of devoid of she even when she brings up these issues, she's not really looking at them or pushing on them in any way, or trying to think about like this. She's burning herself so she can stay awake to study. She's not really thinking about, is that a good thing, is that a bad thing, what sort of effect would that have on a person, that you're literally
And the data
torturing
indicates
yourself.
that that's not true as well. So like I don't like it that it's become sort of we will use the word trope incorrectly.
Yeah,
I guess archetype is the right word.
it's
I feel like
close,
we've been
yeah.
using that a lot, but I guess we're gonna have to get used to it. It's a common theme, variation, item that exists in fantasy. I think, regrettably, that your biggest names right now, Harry Potter, and I mean, I guess really that's the main story that does this. But there's also a lot in Rowling's work that sort of glorifies the abuse of the educational institution of the student, and that the student should just be an open receptacle for anything that is done in the pursuit of getting a better grade is admissible, up to and including fucking like traveling through time. So I'm not surprised to see more of that in this text, but as you know from my work with Le Guin, I think the book would be stronger if she took a more neutral or even negative sort of attitude towards the edifice of the educational institution.
Yeah, and maybe that's a reflection of most people's experiences in school or impression of schooling. Because I mean, neither of us had exactly a 100% positive experience through all of our schooling. But I think there's a lot of people who just sort of hated the whole experience overall. I think there's a lot of people that sort of fell in the middle. And I think it reflects that sort of impression that that's just how school is, perhaps. And that's why we're not fighting those ideas in the narratives, is because it wouldn't be an interesting story necessarily if it was just a girl who had studied all of her life and then went to school and was just really good at it and loved it.
Well, let me clarify a little bit. What I'm focusing on here is that texts like this, like Harry Potter, when I was saying earlier I said like the big two, and I don't know why I said that, because the other one I was thinking of was the Magicians, and they're not even in the same ballpark in terms of sales. But Harry Potter and this text, they glorify the pursuit of a grade at any cost, as opposed to the pursuit of knowledge. Even, and this is, I think, imperative, even when I think the author in this case is trying to put forward the what's really important is the knowledge, even when doing that, she's reinforcing the idea that anything in pursuit of success.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
No, I think that's totally fair. And again, I think that goes along with my earlier statement about people's impressions of school. Like, I don't think most people even care if it's pursuit of knowledge or pursuit of a grade. And in some respects, they might even think of it as the same thing. But the character Rin, the main protagonist here, that's all she cares about is the pursuit of the grade. And the one good guy, the guy who's actually arguing for, no, the knowledge is important, in the very end of section 1, she kind of sets up this foreshadowing where he's now the bad guy for having wanted that. That this whole time Rin has just been pushing to get the A, as it were, and now that she's finally at a point where she thinks she's ready to move on to the next step, he's saying more or less like, hey, you've gained the knowledge I've been trying to get you. Now we can go into what we can, he says, oh, you're cured. And there's this sort of tension between he's saying, oh yeah, you can use it for good and for healing and for this. And she's just saying, yeah, I just want to be a really good warrior. I want the A. And then it sets up this kind of, he's the bad guy. And I don't know, that really grated me at the end because I was like, no, I like the things he's saying. Like, he's making sense, finally.
And
now
I think, how far are we into the book? 40%? Something like that?
Yeah.
So there's still plenty of time for anything that we're saying here to be undone or enhanced or changed, or all of that's still possible in the remaining almost 2/3 of the book. So, but as it stands now, I think you're exactly right. It's really heavy-handed with the with the pursuit of academic excellence as an end, period, as an end in itself. And there's a certain irony there too, isn't there? This author who is, to my knowledge, very, very young for having a successful novel like this at such a young age. That, I mean, maybe this is part of just her experience as, trying to be a writer, and that early in life, maybe for her it has been much more reliant upon being, letting that candle wax hit your arm type situation. I don't know. That was never my experience, and I don't think that's a positive way to view education. Nor do I necessarily think we'll have to see how she critiques the government as the text goes forward, because so far we've mostly just seen veneration of the idea. Basically, she hasn't challenged any of the authoritative roles that exist in the stories. She's just sort of changed them to being female in several instances. So there's a female empress, but there's no, to what I see on the page, so far it totally just props up the status quo of empire, hierarchy, all of those things. I'm not seeing any direct challenge to those established ideas, or do you think I'm wrong there? You think she is challenging?
No, I think you're right, and I think it's worth pointing out, at least on one of the covers, because the Kindle, it's weird. When I bought it, it shows one cover, but when you open the Kindle book, it's a different cover entirely.
Interesting.
The one on the Amazon page, it has this tagline: "They trained her for a war, and she intends to end it." But the one I have doesn't have that. If that's the ideology here, where, they're training her for one thing, but she's going to do something else, like, yeah, that's totally not on display at all yet. She's bucking against some of the restrictions, but she's totally okay with just conforming to them, with just ultimately deciding. Like, she even goes so far as to say, oh, well, I would have these questions, but I just wouldn't ask them because I knew, like, I just need to do what he says, and maybe it'll make sense in the end.
Well, in a lot of senses, the protagonist in this case is, like, she is power hungry. She wants the magic power to do the bad stuff.
Yeah.
Effectively. I mean, she wants to fight, for example, in these barbaric student versus student tournaments. And it's only Jiang, I'm not sure how we're going to pronounce that, Jiang, who, forbids her from participating. And so, yeah, there was a lot of combat porn as well. Many pages dedicated to just describing generalized sort of Asian influenced martial arts movery, which I guess I'm down with some of that. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and maybe, I mean, you know me, I love cheesy kung fu movies and Jet Li and Bruce Lee and all them. Like, my favorite currently is Donnie Yen, for example. Totally into those movies, love it. So maybe that's why I liked it more, is because like I really enjoyed those parts. But is it enriching in any way? No, not really. I mean, it's kung fu porn, as you put it. Like, it's just pretty much watching people beat the crap out of each other, which isn't really what I go to books for. Like, that's why I like the cheesy kung fu movies, is because they're just sort of fun to watch.
No, and it's definitely not what I go to fantasy for.
Yeah.
Despite what the layman would believe, the battle scenes are, for me at least, in the good fantasy books, they are just a treat or a side dish that is served alongside the important thing, which is the philosophic content, the ideological explanations. And I will admit that so far, the ideological content of this novel comes off to me as being very juvenile.
Yeah, and I mean, let me put it this way: when I read Harry Potter, looking back on that, because I recently listened to it on Audible as an adult and watched the movies, yada yada. For me, like, the feeling I get when I think about that is not a kid going to school to learn magic and yada yada. I mean, all that's there. For me, it feels a lot like what I felt in college. Like, yeah, I went to classes and I learned things, but I did all these really fun things with friends, and I got to have some experiences I wouldn't have had otherwise. And there's this whole adventure narrative that centers around the school. Mm-hmm. Whereas the Poppy War, it really just feels more like somebody who got into a school that they don't belong in, and now that they're there, they're just trying to abuse it of its power as much as possible, so that she has the power. And there's not that sort of adventure, fun mystique of the school itself, and it's missing some of these other elements that I really loved in Harry Potter, or even in The Magicians. I didn't really like the book that much, but there was still this sort of mystique about the school itself and the location and the things that were doing. Here, it's just none of that's really there. It's all this focus on she wants power and she's trying to get it any way possible.
Yeah, there's a couple things that we could sort of veer off into, but let's talk about the world building. When you said, about the Chinese influence on the text, the Asian influence, you had mentioned that it wasn't heavy-handed, and I'm wondering, is that to do with what I would consider to be a pretty mediocre world building? In the sense that there's really very little description of architecture, or we know that we're in some kind of empire that has various provinces that are named after animals and creatures. And it sounds as though if there were 10 books in the series, that we might get to, there might be some general like prejudices, kind of like the schools in Harry Potter, where the people from the South province, what was it, the horse, or
something
which
like
one
that.
is she from?
She's from, as far as I know, she's just from a town called Tickany.
No, she says a couple times throughout the text which province. Rooster.
Oh yeah, that's right.
She's totally from Rooster. So Rooster province is southern idiots, and there's that type of thing forming, but I don't find myself being really drawn into the world, with the exception of I like the element of the spear, the spearlies, and the obvious commentary on the average, the perceptions of people of color and indigenous groups.
And that's another one of those things that I was wondering when she first mentioned spear. If you keep in mind that this may be of a Chinese influence or what have you, like, I guess I was thinking maybe like that's Japan. That's because it's a small island off the coast. It's an island nation, what have you. So like, I don't know if that connection is true or if it exists. But if it is, then like that points to some really bad things between China and Japan in general.
I don't
The
know. I guess
tensions there.
I thought they described them as having like particularly black skin.
Yeah, I think
And
so.
so I guess I was being drawn more to um, like African tribes as the influence from which the spear people are
Yeah,
plucked.
yeah. It's hard to say. I mean, like I think you're right in the sense of like that there is that influence there. I just know when she had talked about the island itself, I had thought like geographically, I was thinking like, oh, you have the mainland country, China, and then you have this island nation.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
either way, I think it was a good decision on the part of the author to include this sort of perceived island of savages that
yeah,
was wiped out in the war, but there's, we know of one representative who is still living, and perhaps there's more. Maybe we'll get more information about this as the story goes on. That was
I
a
will
point
say,
of intrigue for me.
and this has always been a nitpicky thing for me with any fantasy, quote unquote. Um, I hate that they're all dead. Like I want more of them, even if most of them were killed, and they just said like, oh, they still sort of exist here and there in little colonies or something. Like, why'd you have to kill off basically all of them? Like, it's like that's part of what would make this story way more interesting or way, cooler for me, is like somebody just came in and literally wiped out an entire race on an island. Like no survivors, almost none. Like I don't know. It doesn't necessarily work for me in the sense of my disbelief, and my suspension of disbelief rather. And it also, I think it's just a crappy narrative decision. Like I want more of these people. But that's a nitpick. That's a thing I've always pointed out in fantasies is they're often, and in a lot of books, I guess, are often pointing to really cool things that just don't exist anymore. Sci-fi, it's often an antique, super advanced culture that preceded everyone that is now gone mysteriously for no reason, and all their tech was way cooler. It's like,
Well,
well,
Farrah Mendelssohn would say that in an immersive fantasy, which is what we're dealing with here, the 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 thing that is up for grabs, so to speak, is not the saving of something necessarily, but a discussion of the loss of the world. So that's why almost exclusively, or to a story, the Lord of the Rings, the Chronicles of Narnia, Harry Potter, all of this stuff. What's happening is the magic is retreating. That you're losing something out of the world, and so that's why you
yeah,
often encounter that particular theme that you don't care for, where it talks about the more interesting, cool wars that happened in the past, or the ancient weapons of great power that no longer exist, or whatever. And I agree with you that in this case, so far, we've seen children beat each other up, and a few paragraphs here and there about maybe some troubles brewing with the adults, and then maybe one of the kids is going to turn into like a Super Saiyan. That's basically the story, and I mean I'm being reductive because part of what we want to do here with this book club is we're not here to just I don't even know what the right term is, to fillet the egos of authors.
I'm not kowtowing before this book in blind adoration.
Because I think it's a great first attempt, but I will admit that the reason that I Googled the author and Wikipedia to find out who they were was that I noticed some pretty, what I thought were kind of juvenile elements to the text, and I wanted to see how many, was this a first attempt, or is this is this a writer in their prime, in their 40s, 50s, 60s writing this text? And then you find that no, it is a very young person. And so I excuse a lot of what I'm finding there, because I mean she's a hell of a lot more successful than we are, no doubt. But that doesn't mean we can't have a fair discussion about the merits of the text as compared to the rest of what we've read in our pretty large history of reading in the genre. And like I said, keep in mind that we're rating it. It's good. It's in the middle of the road. Like we're not saying that it's a bad book, but it's more fun to talk about the parts that could be improved, especially at the beginning of an analysis, because then we can see how much of that holds up. It's possible that she could win us over in the next two sections and add ideological depth and challenge some of the norms that we're experiencing, and more overtly create an authentic female voice in the protagonist, because that's another argument that I would make, is that I don't feel like the protagonist is very genuinely feminine, even considering the menstruation section, which kind of just seemed like, well, put that in because it's girl.
Yeah, I was just gonna say. I mean, I don't know how to come down on that, because like, how I'm not a gender studies expert or what have you. So like, what aspects would make her feminine, or is that just what they might say as a performing femininity or what have you?
Well, let me before I articulate that, let me clarify a little bit about the other half of the statement that I made. I suppose that maybe part of what I'm experiencing is just a revulsion at the frequency with which I find that people write female characters and then just stick on these additional components, and then otherwise it's just the exact same character as any other fantasy that you've ever read, where it's just a boy character. And in this case, there's almost nothing about Rin aside from that they allude to that she could get married, and they allude that she could have sex with this old man that she might have to marry. I wouldn't have known that she was writing about the female experience, except that she offers us this really bright reminder of, oh, by the way, menstruation.
I've read a couple other books now where, and I've been seeking them out as well, where we have a first-person female perspective or a main female protagonist, and it's done very well sometimes. It's done not well a lot, and I don't know, because let's be realistic here. Like, the author is a young woman, so I mean, surely she's capable of conveying her perspective, if nothing else.
Yeah, that's a given, but that doesn't really mean a whole lot as to whether or not she's accurately conveying to a reading audience
Exactly. And that's where I was kind of going, is that if you do just delete the menstruation scene and then like the rape fear that she has about the marriage, you could literally just use gender neutral pronouns, and I really wouldn't be able to come down on one side or the other, like, is this a young boy or is this a young girl? Like, it.
Yes, that's my thing, is I guess all we've done is taken the same old, little boy is special, and then he has to learn a whole bunch of cool stuff, and then he goes to school and there's a mean boy, and they fight each other and they go neck and neck in their studies, and there's the super nerdy sidekick friend, and all she's done is just sort of said, okay, well, the sidekick's now a boy, and this is Hermione Granger is being played by Harry Potter, and Harry Potter is being played by Hermione Granger, and they just inserted a menstruation scene instead of a boner scene, and it's the same story. She still just wants to fight and kill, and it's all the same.
And take as much power as possible.
Exactly. All of these male tropes. Damn it, that's probably not the right use of trope.
No, but whatever. It's a colloquialism.
I'm sorry, Western Illinois University.
Well, and I mean, I would point out, one of the ones that I think did it really well was Brandon Sanderson. Where we probably want.
Oh, we're going to disagree there, my friend.
Well, let me rephrase that. A person who did it better, in the sense that that character there for me was more believably like, oh, this is a young girl, than Rin in the Poppy Wars.
You know what? I wanted to be sardonic, but I think I actually have to agree with you to the letter of what you just said. I think you're right. That it was, for me, a more believable. And I don't know. Here we are, two fucking cis white dudes, and we have decided that the 21-year-old female author is
Couldn't
not
write
good
it.
enough at writing the female protagonist. But you know who is? The 40-year-old
Some dude.
white dude.
Yep.
He's got it fucking nailed down. Okay, this is gross.
And that's what I was trying to get at. Is like I just don't know where I fall.
So
on
are
it.
we just wrong?
I mean, we could be, because like, I guess because part of what is occurring in my mind, and I've thought about this in the past, is, you know, what is the element that would then define this character is female?
I don't know if I know how to articulate that, but what I can say is that reading this fantasy, it did not read to me like an ideologically driven, study-based kind of rewriting of the fantasy to include an authentic female protagonist voice. I read this and it seems cookie cutter derivative school age fantasy fiction, except that she just, instead of it being a male protagonist, she just switched it because I'm a girl. So I'm just going to make my protagonist as a girl, and girls menstruate, and I need something to kill some time between now and the next time I do a fart joke.
Yeah, and I guess my worry is if I was to be rigorous and come down to a, like, oh, this would be a characteristic that would be definably like this character is now female, is that just a sexist expectation, or is that a sexist thing? I'm not sure. Or is this, I guess, they would probably put it as like a gender performance rather than a genuine representation or what have you.
Well, I don't know. I mean, are you asking for any particular performance? Because I mean, I don't have an issue with a girl doing the same stuff as boys. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I am saying is that I think Le Guin would agree with me here, that it's okay to put forward a vision of the female protagonist that overtly does not want to play inside of the rules of the battle metaphor ridden male phallic fantasy. And I absolutely like in this case Rin, she literally is sort of like stepping in, and she wants to like take and become the phallus and like fucking punch and penetrate, and it's all these supercharged masculine metaphors of weapons and fire and all these things that you would normally associate with the sort of played out boyish fantasy, power fantasy, battle fantasy thing, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I guess what's interesting is another book we read, when I think about it, what was it, the last one that we were trying to read right before this. I always get the name wrong. Was it Iron and Steel, Iron Age?
I think it was Iron and Blood.
Yeah, I'm bringing it up. Iron and Magic by Alona Andrews.
Okay.
I'm not really sure where that fits in the canons of, like, would that be classified as a fantasy or a romance or what have you? Or
I would say it's very strongly romance would be the kindest term that I would use. Like romance fantasy.
Yeah, but what was interesting for me is reading that. And again, this might be belying, like, maybe I probably still hold some sexist views or whatever, but I definitely felt as though I was getting a different perspective, a non-traditionally, white male perspective in that story. I would say, like, oh yeah, this is like, I feel as though a woman wrote this, but I don't know if that's 100% true. I just know that for me it was an interesting take because I haven't read things quite like that. It had a different perspective, whereas this fantasy book is just like several others I've read, and that character I've read before, and they've all been boys, they've all been young men. Regardless of who the author was, like, it totally fits into, as you put, like the phallic fantasies. And I just know when I compare it to things that I've read in the past where I feel like this is a different or perspective or a female perspective or however you put it, that this character Rin does not stack up to those. Whatever the specific item is.
No, that's well said. I think that's topic complete. Like I think we did it. So I mean, that's for me. Those are the two major criticisms I have of the text, again with the caveat that I still think it was an enjoyable read. There's this issue of the. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, and I'm not pulling the ripcord yet. Like, I want to get to the end of this.
No, I can't. I absolutely want to finish the book. But there are these two looming issues of feels kind of like a standard male school fantasy with just a couple of the genders flip flopped with a few ornaments, but other than that, not any real substantial change from what I would have expected from just a regular fantasy written by a white dude. And then there's the other issue of just the sort of general, I would say, B- effort at world building. I would say that's definitely the weakest. I feel like with so much to draw from Chinese architecture and history, I feel like it could have been more. The world building could have been better, I think.
When you pointed it out, honestly, I'm giving the world building at least a D, because other than using a couple of words like pagoda, for example, the city that I have in my mind when I think of Singard or Seingard or however we're pronouncing it is essentially the same city from Tolkien. Was it Minas Tirith or the ringed city that's in Tiers?
Minas Tirith.
Yeah, that's essentially what I'm thinking, but fewer walls, because she talks a lot about how it's a tiered city, but then like I just don't get anything out of it that tells me that like it's not just a stone palace structure type thing, or that it's not literally Hogwarts, or that it's not, pagodas like it. Yeah. Other than the one time she specifically mentions, oh, we go to the tier that has the pagoda where the four gods live.
It was very light on the descriptions of characters as well.
Yeah, like some of the characters, I know she's mentioned their names, but multiple times, even though I'm reading this, pretty much day after day straight through, I spent hours reading it one day. She'd bring up names and I'd go, I don't remember who this person is. I don't remember what they look like. I don't know why they're in the narrative. And it was super confusing. I don't even know what they like. I don't even know what the main character looks like when you come to think about it, because she doesn't spend hardly any time on descriptions, which seems odd to me.
Yeah. Okay, so in the interest of time, we've I don't know how long the show is going to end up being on a general run through, and we had some technical difficulties filming this one, so I don't know if it's going to be 30 minutes so far, or has it been closer to 45? I'm not sure. But in the interest of time, I think we've leveled a few criticisms. So is there anything positive that you want to say, or is there any passage that you want to draw us to, or any other element of the story that you want to talk about in this first session?
Ultimately, the only other thing that I wanted to mention was that the enrichment, as we kind of pointed out, was not totally there for me until probably the last 16 to 20 pages, where that finally we start getting into some more ideas of what is the philosophy of this training, and what is the religious philosophies of the nation and our neighboring nations, and she kind of brings in a little bit of that, but I really was hoping to get more from that section at the end. I was really hoping that it would be pushed on more. So, given that it was at the end of part 1, I look forward to seeing more of it in part 2. Mm-hmm. But I really enjoyed those sections. It was a good foreshadowing, I hope.
Well, here, let me read a passage from the end section there, and then we'll talk about it a little bit, if it please you.
Yeah, no, go right ahead. Yeah.
So this is where he talked about how he's cured her. So now we solved your problem, said Jiang. Now you know how you are connected to a greater web of cosmological forces. Sometimes martial artists who are particularly attuned to the world will find themselves overwhelmed by one of those forces. They suffer an imbalance, an affinity to one god over the others. This happened to you in the ring, but now you know where that flame came from, and when it happens to you again, you can journey to the Pantheon to find its balance. Now you're cured.
Yeah, I highlighted nearly the same passage.
Yeah, I would say that's the most overt statement of the underlying philosophy of mysticism that is underneath the text. And I gotta say, I think this is, unfortunately, it's another negative for me. It's another minus.
Yeah,
Because I feel like
see
we've
why
already got it's the special child that can magically study more than anybody else. And, oh, you're the best lore student since this amazing student. And blah, blah, blah. What was the guy's name?
Altan.
Altan, yeah.
Altan, yeah. Well, and if I'm looking down here, it's because I was reading it on my Kindle on my phone.
Yes.
I was trying to find the relevant. I think that part was not one that, as you put out, it's not a very strong thing. But she starts to say things like, here is page 187. Rule of law had to be enforced by propagation of the myth of moral codes. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I hope she pushes into that more. Like this idea, because I feel like that's something that could be pushed on more in this story, as how is this rule of law and being, as she puts it, propagated. How is this myth of moral codes underlying things and so forth? It's like we know it's there, but I want to see what does that mean. Like when you say this in your book, and you go into section 2, and you're ostensibly having this girl trained to be a warrior to fight the system, or at least fight the new oncoming war. How does that philosophy fit in? What are your underpinning moral codes, and how do they reinforce your rule of law? And that I thought was a really great moment, but then we're not getting there yet. So I'm really hopeful we'll see more of that in the second and third part.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't really address, I don't think, a lot of what's in the paragraph I read, but that's a good point nonetheless.
Well, yeah, the paragraph you read, I mean, I think you covered it. It's just like, yeah, it's not really a positive, and it's just supporting a lot of the things from before. Like, it didn't really...
Well, and it's kind of a watered-down version of, like, a Le Guin-style, balance-based, yin-yang, wu-wei, Taoism riff, but with none of the teeth or background that I would expect to see alongside of it. And so it comes off as a very flaccid, all things must be in balance type platitude.
Yeah. The other quote that I also really liked, and this was actually Zhang, the teacher, specifically talking to her, and she says, or he says rather, I'm a mortal who has woken up, and there is power in awareness. And that was another one of those great lines that I was like, okay, cool, like we're getting into something here, where we're starting to talk about this. But again, it just didn't follow through. And then he ends with this, oh, you're cured. To go from, oh, the awareness is power, and he's not teaching her the responsibility of power. He's just teaching her how to not use it. I mean, is that really his moral here?
Yeah, and there's another parallel here, and it's another Le Guin thing. We'll have to get like a graphic to put up, where whenever I peddle my graduate studies, it comes on the screen and mocks me appropriately. But the big quote that's between Sparrowhawk, the main character of Le Guin's Earthsea, and his first and most important teacher, Ogian, is this moment where he doesn't accept the training, and Ogian says, what I have is what you lack. And then he comes back, and the same thing happens in this book, where we're introduced to this sort of eccentric teacher character, and at first the main character is interested and then moves away, and then at the end of this section comes back and then desires the training but still has this youthful will to act. And that's going to be something that we're going to want to pay attention to, because of the presence of these themes of Taoism and balance. We are going to see some kind of an engagement with, or a discussion of the will to act and the will to power as concepts, and that's what I'm looking forward to in the rest of the book. Is, will she surprise me and produce a worthy and nuanced critique of these issues, a la Ursula Le Guin's masterwork? Not saying she has to get to that level at 21 or 22 or whatever with her first book, but are we going to see some kind of a rise to the occasion, as it were, on that front? I guess if we want to, that can just be my last word for the first episode. Is that's the one thing that would really, it would get my brain going, get me really to enjoy the book more, is if she starts to really get into the critique of the main character's will to power and will to act. And somehow we're going to mix that with the image of the Phoenix. And so let's see how, that's my final word. That's what I'm looking forward to. That's what I want to see.
Yeah, the Phoenix thing I think is going to be interesting because that was sort of a last image of the section. So I'm looking forward to that too. For me, I think I'm going to end with a couple of predictions and of not just things I'd like to see, but in the beginning, I think she sets up a couple of things. There's this bit with the drugs, which I don't know, we didn't even touch, but
yeah, well, I mean, we're not going to be able to get to everything in this format.
Yeah.
So hopefully that it turns into like the discussion happens in the comment section. They're like, oh, you didn't talk about this, and then we can just type it out or be like, we'll do a supplemental video or something. But
yeah,
so give us a break. We don't know what the fuck we're doing.
Where it's it's capital punishment and they'll behead you and yada yada yada. So like I expect we're gonna see something come of that because she never really touches it other than she has her weird like vision quest in the cave. So I think in the next part,
her Darth Vader moment.
Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna see something more where either she's gonna use the drugs to harness her power or something, but the drugs are gonna play a role. I think the Nezha person is set up as her diametric opposite, so I know that's gonna come back. I think that should be obvious. But what I hope to see, of that prediction, is I hope that we're gonna see some time after the schooling, and that he's going to be some leader of some unit or something, and she's going to actually have to work with him and befriend him and change that adversarial relationship from school for the better. That's what I want. I'd like to see that. I fear she's probably just going to keep it adversarial and they're just going to fight.
Nah, man, it's going to be like Harry Potter, where the only thing she's going to give you is that at the very end, where they see each other in the train station, Draco Malfoy and Potter, and they kind of...
They squint apprehensively.
Yeah, but they don't do anything, and it's like, oh, maybe one day they could be friends. Oh.
Yeah, and I don't want that. I would much rather have to see those two characters work through the problems in a way that then just goes to a functional end to the story or a functional, cooperation or something. But I mean, like I said, it should be obvious he's coming back. Like, he's not going anywhere.
Okay, that's your prediction.
And then the final one is there's obviously a conflict developing between Rin and her teacher Jiang, and I want to see where that goes. My hope is, if I had to predict any direction, they're going to have a falling out either during school or after. They're going to go apart from each other, and then she may actually have to fight him.
I'm hoping full Mustafar, baby.
Yeah, what I want to see is like,
you were the chosen one.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm thinking it's gonna come down to like Obi-Wan and Anakin there.
That's why I said Mustafar, man.
Yeah. I have the high ground.
Yeah.
So I would like to see that, but I don't. I love this Jiang guy. I know he's weird. He's kind of an archetype, but I've always loved those weirdos in books, and so like I want him to somehow be able to, again, resolve or work with her or what have you. But then where's the conflict in the story? So I don't know.
Okay, so final question, and then I'll have a few words to end us out here. Have I convinced you? Like, are you going to bring your rating down to the 4.5? Are you standing firm, or what?
No, I think I'm going to stand firm on that 6. Like, maybe I'm just a sucker for kung fu, man.
I'm not going to move either this time. I don't know if maybe this will just be a stupid thing where we just highlight to our audience every week that we're incapable of changing our opinions, but the discussion has not made me change my rating, but you have convinced me that maybe there's a hopeful possibility that this could turn into not only just a passable derivative sort of children at school fantasy, but also Star Wars. And so, I'm into that. So
you did change one of my ratings though, because I think the B on the enjoyment is good, but ultimately, like, I think the enrichment has to go a step further down. Whatever I said originally, take a letter off, because like the setting isn't there, the descriptions aren't there, etc. There's nothing wrong with a book that is an A for enjoyment and an F for enrichment. Like, I like a good just fun
yeah, that's
book.
fine. We
But
like a
like
C average, and however we get it is fine.
yeah. So, like, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm just pointing out that, like, yeah, when I give it a lot more serious thought, like, the enrichment does have to take a notch. So, I'm
All
not
right.
so
Well,
immobile.
I want to. If you happened to have watched this video all the way to the end, thanks. Uh, this is I mean, in some ways, we've always wanted to do this project. Like I said, in various forms, and so hopefully this is a journey that you want to go on with us, and hopefully our ability to sort of do this live will increase over time as we get more books under our belt and get used to the format. So tune in next week to find out, will Anakin become a Jedi? Is he the chosen one? Will Obi-Wan Kenobi slice his fucking legs off on Mustafar? You were supposed to be the chosen one. Hit that
Does
subscribe
the
button.
high ground matter?
Is the high ground better? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
It is. You always want the fucking high ground when you're fighting with lightsabers.